Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and tackle a truly fascinating and honestly, kind of counterintuitive idea. It's a concept that pretty much challenges everything we naturally assume about authority and control. We're going to explore the idea that sharing power in a democracy is actually the absolute best way to maintain it. If you've ever thought that letting go of control means losing it altogether, well, the history and data we're unpacking today are going to completely flip that script for you.
So the big myth we need to bust right out of the gate is this faulty assumption that dividing power somehow weakens a nation. And, it makes sense how people get there, right? We often equate unified, concentrated power with strength and stability. We tend to think, wait, if we share power, aren't we just dividing the country? Aren't we just making the government slower, weaker, and way more likely to collapse? Well, no. Modern democratic history tells us the exact opposite is true.
Section 1. Belgium's Blueprint for Peace.
To see how this plays out, let's look at Belgium. Nationally, they faced a really stark linguistic split. You had 59% of the population living in the Flemish region, speaking Dutch, while 40% lived in Wallonia, speaking French. Oh, and there was a tiny 1% German-speaking minority too. Now, the friction here wasn't just about language, it was heavily tied to economics. Historically, the French-speaking minority was wealthier and held more power, which understandably sparked some serious resentment from the Dutch-speaking majority. But here is where the tension hits a boiling point. In the capital city of Brussels, the national majorities and minorities are completely inverted. It's wild. 80% of the population speaks French, and only 20% speaks Dutch. This creates a highly unique, localized problem. You've got a group that's a majority in the whole country, but a distinct minority in the actual center of power and commerce. During the 1950s and 60s, this dynamic created a massive powder keg for civic strife.
So how on earth did they fix it? Well, between 1970 and 1993, Belgium did something truly radical. They amended their constitution 4 separate times. Instead of trying to force one culture to assimilate to the other, they built these incredibly sturdy, load-bearing pillars of compromise. First, they mandated an equal number of Dutch and French-speaking ministers in the central government. That meant no single group could just push through unilateral decisions. Second, they gave significant autonomous powers to state governments. Third, they created a separate government for Brussels itself, with strictly equal representation for both communities. And finally, they set up a community government to handle cultural and educational issues based purely on language. It's a highly complex model, no doubt about it, but it actually worked. It prevented a civil conflict, and as a huge testament to its success, Brussels was eventually chosen as the headquarters for the European Union.
Section 2. Sri Lanka's costly conflict.
Now, in stark contrast to Belgium, let's look at Sri Lanka. Here, the demographic split was much more lopsided. You had a dominant Sinhala-speaking majority, who are mostly Buddhist, making up a massive 74% of the population. The minority, coming in at 18%, were Tamil speakers, primarily Hindus and Muslims. But instead of trying to balance these groups out, the government that took over after independence in 1948 made a fatal calculation. They decided the majority should simply rule over the minority. And that decision sparked a devastating escalation, which really kicked off formally in 1956. That's when the government passed an act recognizing Sinhala as the only official language, literally completely disregarding Tamil. Then they doubled down. They pushed through policies favoring Sinhala applicants for university spots and government jobs, and even drafted a constitution mandating the state to protect and foster Buddhism. Naturally, the Tamil population felt entirely alienated and systematically discriminated against, and when their peaceful demands for regional autonomy were repeatedly shut down, the distrust just metastasized. By the 1980s, political organizations were demanding a fully independent Tamil state. This absolute refusal to share power led directly to a decades-long destructive civil war. It caused thousands of deaths, wrecked the economy, and didn't end until 2009. When you put these two historical paths side by side, the contrast is just staggering. Belgium chose accommodation. They chose respect for diversity by implementing equal representation and community governments. The outcome? They maintained their unity and completely avoided a civil war. Sri Lanka, on the other hand, chose majoritarianism. They imposed supremacy in language, in jobs, and in religion. And the outcome there was a brutal civil war and massive cultural and economic devastation. It proves definitively that trying to artificially force unity through sheer majority rule actually destroys it. Accommodating diversity is the real secret to maintaining a nation.
Section 3. The Why. Prudential versus moral reasons.
So, why exactly does power sharing work? The rationale generally falls into two distinct camps. On the practical side, we have what are called prudential reasons. This just means power sharing is desirable because it reduces the possibility of conflict between social groups. It prevents violence, and it practically ensures the long-term stability of the political order. Think of it this way. The tyranny of the majority isn't just bad for the minority. It eventually turns around and ruins the majority too. On the flip side, we have moral reasons. This goes a lot deeper. Power sharing is the very spirit of democracy itself. A legitimate government is one where citizens actually acquire a stake in the system through real participation. People have a fundamental, moral right to be consulted on how they are governed.
Section 4. 4 Pillars of Power Sharing.
Okay, so how do contemporary democracies actually pull this off in the real world? Well, they distribute power in 4 distinct ways. First up is horizontal distribution. That means creating checks and balances among the legislature, executive, and judiciary, all at the same level of government. Second is vertical division, which is pushing power down from the central government to local and regional levels. Third, they empower diverse social groups. They did this by using tools like reserved constituencies to ensure that marginalized communities always have a guaranteed voice at the table. And finally, the fourth way is sharing power indirectly among competing political parties and movements. By relying on coalitions and interest groups, they ensure that power never stays permanently concentrated in just one single hand.
To really highlight a key architectural feature of this system, let's zoom in on that second pillar for a second, federalism. This is huge. It isn't just about the central government delegating a few chores. Federalism ensures that provincial and local governments are not merely subordinate to a central authority. No, they hold distinct, constitutionally guaranteed powers of their own. It acts as a structural guarantee that power is permanently shared across the map, rather than just being hoarded by elites in the capital city.
It all ultimately boils down to this undeniable reality. Imposing the will of the majority community over others might look like a super attractive option in the short run. It's incredibly tempting for a majority to just grab the wheel and drive. But in the long run, it completely undermines the unity of the entire nation. As we saw so tragically in Sri Lanka, refusing to share power is a dangerously faulty foundation. It's a shortcut that eventually brings ruin to absolutely everyone involved.
I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to chew on regarding the spaces where you live, work, and govern. When you look closely at your own community, your local organizations, or even your workplace, are you building tables where power and decision-making can be shared, or are you building walls designed purely to protect the will of the majority? Because, as we've clearly seen today, only one of those structures is truly built to last. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this explainer today.